Hello and welcome to another episode of the CG Garage. This is episode number 347, featuring Steve Griffith, Vice President of Production over at Legend. You guys will notice that Kristen is not with me today. She is on a vacation, so that means that I have to fly solo. But I do miss her, and I wish she'd come back soon, because she does so much for the podcast and contributes so much to helping it run smoothly. And let's just put it this way. Yeah, I'm going to be very happy when she returns. But I'm glad she's having a nice vacation as well. So anyway, back to the podcast. This is Steve Griffith. We're talking about Steve Griffith, and I've known him for a very long time. I knew him back at Digital Domain. It seems like a lot of my stories start that way. But, he and I worked together at DD, and we worked also at a place called SpeedShape together. But has worked at a ton of places: Rodeo Effects, MPC, Luma Pictures, Atomic Fiction, and right now he's at Legend. He's always been on the production side of things, and a really, really good perspective on that. So we talk about the business of visual effects in a lot of ways, as a producer and head of production, and that kind of role that he's had. And it was really good to see his insight on where the business is going of visual effects. So really like that, including his conversation. His take on virtual production, what that really means, LED walls. He's really got a lot of thoughts on that process, as well as AI. So we really get into it, and it was really great to sit down with Steve and chat for a little bit. Well, virtually sit down with him, but it was really, really cool to catch up with him and to see all those amazing things. Now, we don't have any specific announcements of any specific events that are happening right now or coming up, but I do want to say that on last Thursday, I was over at the Emmys with Vlado and some of the other Chaosers, and where Vlado was able to receive, on behalf of Chaos, an Emmy for the outstanding achievements that V-Ray has done and contributed to the broadcast world. So super happy to have him on board, and to have him here in town and be able to share that moment with him. I couldn't be more proud of Chaos and all the amazing things that it's done. So thank you again to the Emmys for allowing us to receive this award and for inviting us to be there. So it was really, really a great event and a really great honor as well. So thanks again. But without any further ado, let's get to the podcast. Episode number 347, featuring Steve Griffith, Vice President of Production at Legend.
Welcome to another CG Garage, where the Chaos Group talks. You'll know it's over when the last bucket drops. We're gonna fire off rays in high dynamic range. We know that ambient occlusion is passé. Global illumination won't lead you astray. And while image-based lighting is really swell, you need to make sure everything has Fresnel.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised by them. Actually, it's funny. AirPods has worked out better than some of my over-the-ear headphones, but it depends on my mic. Like, you have a pretty nice mic.
Yeah, this is a mic for podcasting. I've had this for since the beginning. 7 years, man. I've been doing this podcast.
Wow. I thought it was longer. It feels like longer. But it's cool.
Yeah. It's been a while since I've been doing this. But okay, speaking of which, we got to go. So I can't wait to tell people, or have you tell people, your amazing origin story, backstory, because it goes. I don't know how you went from all the things that you've done in your past to getting into visual effects to doing all the way to where you are now. It's a huge journey. And let's unpack this a little bit. Young Steve Griffith, where were you growing up?
Yeah. So, baby Griff, I was, I grew up in Oregon, Minnesota, right. Oregon, and then I went to school at the Oregon State University, where it was, I had a business degree. But in the middle of all that, I came down and worked in Los Angeles for Centropolis for a little bit. And, it was, I think the first time it was for a summer, and then I came down for another summer. And anyway, I cut my teeth on Centropolis, and it was the Matrix sequels and a couple other projects. This is before, I think Matrix shut down right in the middle of the Matrix sequels. Mm-hmm. Anyway, then I came back and worked for Digital Domain. It was Peter Pan. It was Christina Reed was a producer. I think Mark Forker was the VFX suit.
Yes.
and then rolled on to Stealth and Flags of Our Fathers, and then I was at Sony ImageWorks doing. I think I worked on Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, and
Right.
then Speed Shape, and that's where we got to know each other. So
you were at Sony around the same time I guess I was, because I was there on Ghost Rider. So
yeah, it was around. It was Lion, Witch was around that same time.
Right. And you were doing beavers, and there's a lot of beavers that you guys were working on, right?
Yep. And wolves, and also, I mean, it was yeah.
I remember at some point we were doing something silly between the two shows, because we were doing all these heads on fire, right? So we would take a shot. We were taking a shot from Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe that had the beavers, and we would light their heads on fire and send it to your dailies. Do you remember that?
I don't remember those dailies, but our dailies were interesting with all the conversations of, having them, go and like they were in the rivers and there was wolves. And anyway, it was. Yep. And Jim Burney was great. He was a great VFX soup. It was a great team. I've enjoyed every place I've worked at. I thought Sony was a great place.
But what got you into visual effects? Like, what did you say? Hey, I want to do movies, like from Oregon.
Well, so my aunt and uncle had been in the industry. Gil Gagnon had been running Cinesite for a number of years, and then he was a VP of post production at Disney. And then my aunt, Ray Griffith, was at DreamWorks for a while, had been Jerry Bruckheimer's VFX producer for a while. And, so they were industry folks, and they introduced me to some people that they knew at Centropolis, and that's how I got to know the Centropolis folks. So, yeah.
Got it. Okay. So that's how you, I was like, how did you do that? Because I think you were working a police force at one point too, weren't you?
So right when I was going to school in Oregon, I was a deputy in the sheriff's department for 2 years.
Wow.
It paid better than the on-campus jobs. So I had known the sheriff at the time. I had worked with him on an Eagle Scout project when I was in high school. And that's how I got recruited.
Yes, I remember, because I used to have problems where I was like trying to figure out how to get myself out of a ticket, and then you would tell me what to do.
Yeah, I had a pretty good track record for a while. I'd gotten 12 out of 14 people out of tickets at one point when I was living in LA, and then of course I've been to other countries and stuff like that. It still works. It still works. The system has a little bit of a hole in it. So
yeah, I think it was Niederhorst was getting a ticket for doing a U-turn, and you said, "Well, if there's a driveway there, you could probably get your way out of it." I was like, "Yes, tell me what to do. What do I tell the cops?"
It helps have a little bit of an inside, scoop, right?
Yeah, for sure. All right, so but you're right. It's like we've known each other for a very long time. Peter Pan was around the same time. Was at the end of Day After Tomorrow. And then I think you worked on iRobot as well, or did you work on iRobot?
Around it. I mean, that's when the reason I was involved in iRobot was because we, I was on the production team that was helping out with the DD's asset management network, right? Right. It was the DAM system. And I was working with Jeff and Darren to help do a UI interface for production and all the production tools. And so, and also the rendering and everything. So we were working on, combining all the pipeline tools across all the projects, because up until then, DD, each show had been its own island from pipeline, and we were trying to have a unified pipeline across all shows. So that's probably where we bumped in. Is I was going to all the shows, working with all the different soups and stuff. But yeah,
and you were also working obviously closely with Rob Niederhorst, which is when we all reconnected at Speed Shape.
Yeah,
but I believe you were one of the people who was basically saying, "Hey, why don't we try this V-Ray thing for this 9 Inch Nail video?" Is that right?
Well, so what happened was on Stealth, Vern was, trying to figure out how to render planes quicker and faster. And then of course the first person we came to was you and Rob, and it was like, hey, what this V-Ray thing? It's amazing. And then eventually the 9 Inch Nails kind of spun out of that. But but I think actually I can't remember if it was 9 Inch Nails or Stealth that came first. But it started
Stealth.
Stealth started the V-Ray conversation because at that time it was for some reason, right? It was more difficult for us to do hard surface, you know, get to 80% in hard surface than it was to do other things. And it was like, this should be really easy. Why are we having a hard time? If V-Ray can do it in 15 minutes, well, why is it taking our other, you know, Mental Ray or RenderMan longer? So anyway, yeah, it's kind of when everyone was, you know, V-Ray had a couple of demos out there and it was blowing people's minds.
This is 2003, right? So V-Ray was very young on the market, like 1 year.
What I remember though was even in that first year, someone had put out a video of like this wine glass in a kitchen falling or something like that, and everyone was going bananas over that.
Right. But there was also one shot of a plane that was not rendered in V-Ray, but it was a plane that was just flying. That was rendered in Brazil, I believe.
Yes. Yes. That's right. It was like, whoa, hey. And then Brazil.
That was done by Rune Spawn, I believe, as the guy who did it, who's still around. I actually saw him do some stuff now, but he did it in Brazil, and we were looking at that and we're like, why can't we figure out how to render a plane properly? And this guy just did it in his basement somewhere in Sweden. And we're freaking Digital Domain, you know?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, that's funny. I haven't thought about Brazil in a long time, but you're right. That was a big part of the conversation.
Yeah. I think what it was that they did a Skunkworks thing, and you probably remember this. It was with Lightwave, RenderMan, Brazil, and V-Ray.
That's right.
Right. So
yeah, and so I was trying to put together all the data for Darren, and yeah, there's like this small little team that had kind of reps from commercials and features, and we were just trying to basically propose something to the studio that said, hey, look, let's rethink how we're rendering. And yeah, it was I remember it was a big deal. It was a lot of politics involved.
Oh yeah. Anytime you get renderers involved, it's what did Vern say is like, man, when you got two people talking about different renders, they start fighting. It's like Shiites and Sunnis, man. It's not a good time.
Oh yeah. People. I mean, you had your diehard Lightwave guys and your, you know. Anyway, it was fun.
Yeah, for sure. Anyway, all right. So we reconnected at a little basically a kind of a startup satellite office of something called SpeedShape. We're going to work on cars. That was the big thing we were doing. And I was only there for, I think maybe like 9 months or something like that. But it was very interesting. But you have since worked at some of the biggest studios and done most of the work and really exposed yourself through a lot of the different pipelines and businesses out there. And your business background has been very interesting. So let's give people a little bit of an overview of all the different places you've gone and what kind of projects you're working on. And then I want to get into the state of the industry with you from that perspective, because that would be great.
Yeah. So, you know, look, SpeedShape was a great opportunity because it, you know, helped me understand how business is run, because it was a bit of a startup, but it was not, because it was an it was a kind of a satellite office for a Detroit company. But, you know, it was, you know, Rob and myself and, you know, Carl, we're all building a business together. You know, we grew it from 3 to, I think we had 25 people. You know, it was just, you know, and we're doing commercial work, and you know, we did that Blackbird spot for Joe Kaczynski, and you know, it was some really exciting work. Anyway, from there I went to Luma Pictures, and I was at Luma for a long time, and that's been one of my favorite experiences. I really loved working at Luma. Still love those guys. They're a great shop, do really good work, and from Luma, you know, they were very artist run. I mean, their producers were also technology and creatives, right? So I was the first time that I think they had hired like a true production person, and so, you know, we started hiring coordinators and started building out our pipeline, and then we grew, and I was with Luma for quite a while, and really left because I wanted to pursue a software startup. And so did a software startup where we were basically building VFX pipeline tools for the cloud.
Okay. Where was that?
So it was started in LA, and then we was like, do we do our software development in Silicon Valley or the Silicon Slopes? So we went out to Utah, and like, it was short-lived for me. You know, I think investors wanted to do one thing, and I you know, we wanted to do something very tailored to the VFX industry, and they wanted something a little bit broader. And so, you know, whatever, they went their way and I went my way, but it was a good experience because, you know, I think it was a little early, right? Like the studios, MPA weren't ready to work on the cloud back in 2011. And it just wasn't something that was adopted. And
Right.
so doing a whole, like, ours was black box pipeline in the cloud. You log in and you have all the tools that you would at a major VFX studio,
Right.
and you do visual effects as an individual. You can tie into other people. I mean, it's kind of where the industry is going, is cloud-based visual effects computing.
Yeah,
And
but
a lot of that,
2011 it was pretty ahead of
it
its
was.
time.
People
Yeah.
didn't understand security, and that it could be, they didn't understand thin clients and how you could utilize, and honestly, people's, the latency back then, and broadband wasn't everywhere. So look,
Mhm.
it was a little early. And so I went back and worked for Luma in Australia for a while. It was a
Oh,
little bit
wow.
challenging. Yeah, I mean,
Did you
look,
move there?
I did. Yeah, moved the whole
Yeah.
family to Australia.
Wow.
We took a little hiatus in Nashville because my wife's a musician, and so she did some work out in Nashville, and that was just for a short period. And then we moved to Australia, and it was great. We while I was there, we helped co-produce an animated television series, plus a bunch of Marvel and studio work and visual effects. And about half the studio was in Melbourne and half the studio was in Santa Monica. I ended up coming back to the States. It was a really hard year personally. My wife was going through chemo at the time. She's fine now, but it
Oh,
was
wow.
it was a rough year. So, and it was, it's really far away from family, being in Australia. So, just not a lot of support. So we came back and took a break, and did some work for Wyden Kennedy up in Portland for a bit. Then was recruited to go up to MPC up in Vancouver,
Okay.
and actually loved working for MPC. I worked on Justice League and a bunch of other little projects, and then went out to Montreal. Worked for Atomic Fiction, worked on Welcome to Marwen, loved Atomic Fiction.
Uh-huh.
It was right towards the end of Welcome to Marwen that they were being acquired by Deluxe. And, at that
Right.
time, I was really enjoying working for like that mid-size boutique company,
Mhm.
and just was a little unsure about, going back to work for another big company. And of course, in Montreal, the market is so, there's just a lot of demand for people, from production to artists, and so everyone's being pulled from different studios. And so I went over to Rodeo, and worked as head of production over at Rodeo, which is I think every company I've worked for, I've had just a really great experience. I love the people over at Rodeo. They've got a great pipeline. It reminded me a lot of Luma, where it was kind of, I mean, they were larger than Luma.
Right.
And they had again, we had multiple locations, right? We had a Germany location, Los Angeles, two locations in Quebec. But everyone there was just really lovely people. Sebastian's a great owner of the company, and we worked on a lot of projects, a lot of great projects. Worked on Stranger Things and a bunch of studio projects. I think we had 10 different production teams working on 14 different projects at one time, and just their technical background, like their pipeline, and the people that are running it, from both the 2D and 3D aspect, they're just really smart and just really great people to work for. Um, we At the time when we were in Vancouver, we had fostered a 10-year-old boy,
Okay.
and in Vancouver, it was he's in a situation. It's kind of crazy. His mom had 6 kids, and they had been taken away by the state, and then his mom had another 6 kids. And so Ocean, who we fostered for a while, was the oldest of that second round of 6 kids. And there were some struggles at home, and we didn't want to see, they were this family was like friends of friends, and we didn't want to see him taken over by the state again and start that whole process. And so, what was supposed to be 3 weeks ended up turning into 3 years, and Ocean ended up following us to Montreal, and we had him for the 2 years that we were in Montreal. And um, there was, for a bunch of different reasons, he had to move back home to Vancouver, right, to be closer to
Okay.
his mom. And I mean, there was a trial where he was actually going to live with his mom for a little bit. And anyway, it was hard. We had been with him for 3 years, um, and so we wanted to be in the same time zone and closer in case there needed to be support. And we didn't really want to go back to Vancouver. And there was an opportunity came up with Legend,
Okay.
which is here in Los Angeles. And so we took that opportunity because it brought us back to LA, and we're still close with Ocean, and we're able
Right.
to maintain that relationship. And anyway, that's how I got back to LA. And so I've been working with Legend for a couple of years, and that's where I'm at right now.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Now that's really amazing. You've always been an extremely kind person to everyone around you.
Oh,
That is in
thanks.
your nature. You're also a very entertaining person. You always have a good joke about everything. So I love being around you, Steve, because he always makes me feel good. But
Thanks.
but that's very cool that you're back in LA and you've done that stuff. But through that immense journey that you've taken and the different locations and the different companies you've had a very broad view of the industry and a very broad look at everything that's going on. And so what I think would be really great is if you could share some of the thoughts about like, what have you seen as trends from the past to now, and how do you think that's going to affect our future in some way? What are some of the biggest changes that you've seen since, the early days of, Matrix and Peter Pan to now, right? I mean, we were already talking about the struggle of picking the right renderer, right? Back then, but then like, has that changed much through the years, and what's going on now? Well, like what are some of the things you've seen that are driving the business, especially on the technology and business side?
Yeah, well, from my side, a lot of it is, as a producer or executive producer, it's the financial side. So incentives has probably been one of the biggest things,
Tax
and
incentives, more specifically,
tax
right?
incentives, and the globalization of talent.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, uh, it's our industry refers to it as outsourcing, but it's not really outsourcing anymore. I mean, just like every other industry, we're now a global market, right?
Right.
As everyone is more connected, and as the labor, I mean, the way that I see it, I don't know. I used to feel very differently about globalization, right? Like, hey, we should just keep all the jobs here. But we are Hollywood, we are LA,
Mm-hmm.
but there's talent everywhere, right?
Sure.
Who's to say that someone that grows up in the States and finds their way into visual effects and learns how to become a visual effects artist? Who's to say that we should favor anybody here versus anywhere else that has a skill set, right? Like, if we truly are a talent-based industry, we should allow talent to be nurtured and utilized wherever it is.
Right.
I understand that there's a downside to it because, I mean, I'm in LA. I've been in LA, but now that I've been everywhere and I've seen
Mm-hmm.
that there's talented artists in Australia and India and Canada and London, and there's talent everywhere. And I
Right.
think everyone deserves around the globe to work on movies. And
Right.
so I've had a slightly different perspective on the globalization of talent. Yeah, I mean, Apple manufactures in China because it's cheaper, right? But
Sure.
we're manufacturing globally because one, there's cost benefits, and two, there's talent everywhere, right? And
Right.
so, I think it's important. I mean, it's hard. Montreal, even within Montreal, it was hard to find people, right?
Right.
So, like, there's just some balancing, and I get both sides too. I just think that at some point we're a global community, right? We're a
Right.
global community of artists and VFX technologists, and so at some point, I think it's healthy to have artists everywhere.
But do you think
Um,
it was hard on you and your family because you obviously you led a very nomadic life, right? In a lot of ways, you're going from
that
one
was by
place to the next.
choice.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
so like we could have stayed put, right? At every one of these opportunities, I could have stayed where I was at, and we could have settled in, but we up until recently, I've had a young family, and
Right.
it was we've wanted to experience and give them perspective, and so all the choices we made have really been based on, in part, wanting to be in other new places and see the world. Um, and we wouldn't give it. It's been challenging. I mean, my kids probably have some PTSD over moving so many times, but at the same time, they've also see the benefit to it. Um, but look, tax incentives and the globalization of visual effects, that's one thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the other part is, like, I think most of we it's no secret that there's a condon you know that there's been condensation of companies, right? You have, even DNEG, or whatever, Prime Focus and Technicolor are some of the I think the two largest companies out there, Deluxe,
Right.
and companies like DD, who used to be the largest, are now not the largest. Companies like ILM and Weta, who used to be the largest, are now smaller compared to Double DNEG and MPC,
Hmm.
and so that's a huge industry shift. They're not any.
Right.
They're all great companies. They all produce fantastic work, have great VFX soups, but it's
Right.
it's just different, right? And so the landscape of VFX company ownership is very different than it was when I first started out, and companies going out of business, companies starting, there's a lot of boutique houses, and there's also more demand. Like the demand for VFX has gone crazy over the last 20
And what do
years.
you think is driving that demand? Obviously, I mean, there's a lot of, Marvel films are being done like every week, but there's also like, obviously, do you think streaming has had a huge effect on everything
Yeah,
right now?
yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, the demand for content's gone up, and the transparent visual effects. When people start realizing more things they can do with visual effects, the whole fix it and post thing, that we that you now don't have to pre-plan for things, and that you can just
Mm-hmm.
go. You can always just think about it afterwards. That's a lot of what we do, is the whole transparent visual effects, um, and so it's just utilized more in different areas, and I think that, on top of superhero films being so huge, and I mean that's been a lot of where our work goes. So
Right.
for a lot of reasons, streaming, more application, big budget films that are driving audiences, right? People started seeing that the Harry Potters and the superhero films were bringing audiences to come because they liked what we do,
Right.
and you know I think that's an important factor, is that our our talent pool is what's driving the growth in the market too. It's
That's
driving
awesome.
up revenue for studios.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's true. I think that's really a great point. I'm curious about it. Obviously, I want to know, what this really means for us. But there's something about the way that we've been doing things recently that seems a little bit different than we've been doing it in the past. I think there, like you said, there's a lot of there is that conversation of fixing it in post, as you mentioned. But I have a feeling now, specifically with some of the things that are going on in the idea of virtual production, that fix it in post is something that we're going to try to change a little bit, so we can
Hmm.
fix it in virtual production, in basically in the camera, right?
In
Do you
pre-production,
think,
yeah.
yeah, what do you think the impact of virtual production is, or what's your general thoughts about virtual production on this side?
Well,
And
it's
I'm
become
not
a
just
big.
talking about LED walls, I'm talking about the
Yeah,
whole virtual production
yeah,
thing.
yeah. No, look, you know, companies like MPC really spearheaded, virtual art department,
Hmm.
and especially in projects like Lion King, and companies like Profile, and you just read Epic's 411 on virtual production, and you see all it, a lot of it is non-LED wall based, and a lot of it is this virtual art department, and
Hmm.
other, there's so many. It's very ubiquitous, right? There's a lot of applications for what we call virtual production, but the idea is that, I think in general, is that you have a better idea of what you're producing before it's done, right? You're putting more thought into pre-production. The director and the cinematographer and everyone is seeing what you're going to get sooner, right? Which I think helps a creative make a better movie, right? I
Right.
think there's some, I guess there's some advantages in fix it in post, but if you can pre-plan, and I mean, look, you and I have worked with directors that know what they want, right? I
Yeah.
mean,
Like Joe
working with
Kosinski.
Clint Eastwood, right?
Oh,
Clint
right.
Eastwood, he knew exactly what he wanted,
Yeah.
and very few things, deviated from the path. Like it was a really easy director to work with.
Hmm.
When we worked with the Coen brothers, they knew what they wanted. They had a lot of planning that went into the movies that they produced, and that's refreshing, right?
Hmm.
And I think virtual production brings aspects to that too. Which, look, I understand the reason to want to change everything later, but it's expensive. It's really expensive. So, and I think if you can, if I think if you're more informed earlier, you can make better decisions, right? If you're it like a good example is virtual art department, right? You're seeing your camera moves and things being rendered in real time, and you're seeing a bit of your movie being made. It's like real time pre-visualization, right? So
Right.
if you're directing your previs and seeing it as you're doing it, I can only imagine as a director, I'm not a director, but I can only imagine a director that would help you with your edit, right? Because now you have something to edit with rather than shooting and then editing, right? So,
Right.
all these things should be creative tools that we grow and expand on projects because it makes us be better filmmakers. It helps us create a better product. I mean, we're in a product making industry, right? Movies are
Right.
products, and the better the product is, the more audience you're going to have, the more you're going to sell, and the more shareholders are going to be happy, right? So ultimately, right, if we use tools like virtual production, we'll make better products. And the usage of LEDs or the LED walls gives you, I think, a better in-camera product, right? I mean, a good example. I've even seen recent movies that have green screens, and I look at them like, we've done better green screens a decade ago. As far as like a final composite, right? There's just things that come out that are kind of cringy, and you look at it and you're like, we could be doing better. And green screens are challenging. I'm not giving people a hard time. It's just, they have to be lit right.
Yeah, and that's really hard to light a good green screen and light the character the way you want at the same time.
I mean, I'm looking at your glasses. I can see everything in your reflection, right? I mean, like I can see the rest of your living room in your glasses, right? And so it's hard not to you have to deal with that with green screens. Whereas what an LED volume gives you is real lighting. And that's just something that it just takes the edge off of studio based photography. And so when you're in a studio and you have to come up with, you have to light things the way that we're used to lighting things in the studio, the LEDs give you exterior lighting, interior lighting, the way that it properly should be lit. And that's an exciting step in what I guess we call in-camera visual effects or in-camera compositing, right? So, I just see the whole virtual production with or without LEDs as an extension of the visual effects process that we're already doing. It's just now you're spending a little more time up front, but you're getting more feedback sooner.
Well, it's not necessarily, new technology in some ways, right? Because really in-camera VFX is great for lighting, as you mentioned, right? And it also makes, certainly the green screen halo behind you kind of an easier thing to deal with, right? But we used to have something called rear projection. It was basically the same thing, right?
It is. It's modern day rear projection.
It's modern day rear projection. It's got some cool effects like parallax, and it's definitely much brighter than rear projection. But it's really kind of a great thing. And in fact, you know what? I do remember now, like I've told this story before, but on Oblivion, and I worked on Oblivion, right? And Oblivion had a similar situation. Now, it wasn't an LED wall, but they basically made it these series of projectors to basically show the sky outside the house, or outside the apartment, or the house. And it was a house that was all glass and shiny floors, right? They wanted to put all green screen back there. So we told them, like, as a visual effects company, we said, that's a terrible idea. And we did a CG house and put a bunch of green screen back there and says, here's what it's going to look like. It's going to be a nightmare. And they're like, oh. So we actually did a CG version of it to showcase why we don't want them to give us more work. Because the work was going to be so hard. Yeah. And in fact, I remember actually, I was lucky enough to hang out with Mr. Cruz himself. And he was saying, it was the most beautiful thing to be in that environment, to see the skies through those projectors, because it gave me the feeling of being where I wanted to be.
Sure.
Right. And so the talent seems to really appreciate being lit by the environment that they want to be in, as opposed to just massive blue background and say, good luck. Try to imagine the rest.
There was a similar experience on Murder on the Orient Express, right?
Oh,
where it was, they had two options. They could have shot on green screen and had to deal with reflections and everything because the entire movie was on this train. And I remember I was at at NPC at the time,
Mm-hmm.
and we got all of these massive plates that we had to stitch together in this really short period of time. And when I first heard about the LED walls, I was like, "Oh, come on, you know, this can't be where we're at. Like, we're putting all this content onto a TV, and let's just do a green screen." And then I was sold because we saw the results. Right, the
Right.
results were amazing. You couldn't tell,
Right.
and it would have been a nightmare in green screen. And so
Mm-hmm.
it was the right call, and there's a lot of people that worked on that. There's a whole team that designed and built those LED walls. Fred Waldman, Bob Finley, that did the engineering behind it, and it was one of the largest LED volumes to be used on a major motion film to date at that time. There
Right.
had been other things, but that was a major accomplishment, and kind of a precursor to Mandalorian, right? Which has gotten a lot of attention recently, which also Fred Waldman and his team worked on,
Right.
and that was just the next evolution, which added in camera parallax and everything that ILM's done to date, and I just again, it's an evolving technology
Right. Yeah. I
from
think,
Oblivion all the way through where they're at in
yeah.
Mandalorian.
No, yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Now, the Oblivion didn't have parallax. It just had big
Right.
screens that were outside. So,
And same thing with Murder. Orient Express. There was no parallax, but it was
right.
very but it was moving content, right?
Sure. But in
And
some cases, like I mean, you can actually, I just remembered, like you look at what they did on Gravity. Gravity was a
yep,
similar thing, right?
it
In a
was
lot of ways.
same
Uh,
team.
Same team.
Yep,
All right, there you go. So it
yep,
all, it all makes sense.
yeah,
Okay. So obviously, everywhere I'm looking, everyone is trying to build LED walls in some ways. And there's a huge, from what I've heard, a lot of people saying, I just bought all these LED panels. I don't know what to do with them. Can you help me put these things together? Like there's a huge demand for people trying to figure out how to get this up and running. There is obviously going to be an impact on the industry using these systems. But do you think this demand is going to increase, peak? Like where do you think the demand for this stuff is going to go?
this is an evolved visual effects tool, right? That's being now, instead of us being in the last 9 months of production, we're now the first 3 to 6 months, or first nine, whatever. We're at the beginning now,
Right.
and as I believe that as creatives start utilizing this tool more and understanding how to use it, that it will start to be used just as commonly as visual effects is being used,
Okay.
as traditional visual effects processes are being used. So the demand is going to go up as people understand how to use the technology. Right now, there's not a lot of people. So the I I have no doubt that it's an educational thing at this point, right? Creatives, directors, cinematographers, production designers, and visual effects supervisors and producers need to understand, and executives just need to understand how this stuff works. What is it?
Right.
What are the limitations? What are the things that? What are the advantages? Because it's on both sides. There's both advantages and disadvantages to using technology. I think the
Right.
advantages outweigh the disadvantages, and it really depends on what you're trying to shoot, right?
Yep.
But there's some you know having an 8 hour sunset, right? Is or not, or 8 hour golden hour, 8 hour,
Mm.
that
Golden
perfect
hour. Yeah.
time, golden
Yeah.
hour, yeah. So it's just look, it's going to go up, and the teams that know how to do it will start educating other people, and then you'll have less people asking, what do I do with all these panels? But it's there are a lot of people out there that don't know what they're doing, and so
No, I
what
know,
I've
I
come
know.
in,
That's what I'm getting at. Is it like, obviously you've thought about this for a while. You've worked at all these studios. You've seen all this stuff, and you know all the teams, as you said. But I think there's some people who's like, I just need to, like, I've heard the term from, remember Lou Pecora? I don't know if you remember Lou from
oh
DD.
yeah.
Lou was like, he's like, someone came up to me and said, can't we just Mandalorian this? And I'm like, he's like, what does that, what do you even mean? You don't even, it's like, oh, we can't go to the location. We'll just Mandalorian it. It's like, you got to think of it more practically than that, like, or what it does. And I think this is a really great way that you put it. And I love the fact that you said it's like, instead of being the last 9 months, but the first 3 to 6 months, right? Because that means you're prepping for things, right? And one of the things that, I used to think about or try to sympathize with directors is that they do all this stuff. They do it in front of a giant blue screen or green screen, right? And then they don't even know what they really got after they shot it.
Sure.
And they just hand it over to a visual effects company and hope for the best, right? And then they're like, there you go. But when they do it on a LED wall, they'll see it.
Yeah.
For while they're shooting. So do you feel that that's going to change how they perceive CG in that way? Because they haven't really been perceiving CG as this magical thing that goes out the other end and hope for the best.
Well, yeah, that, and they'll have to approve those assets before they go on and shoot. Right. So
Right.
instead of doing it as a post process, they're going to be doing it in pre-production. They're just like they're approving sets with the set designer, they're going to have to approve virtual sets with the
Right.
virtual art department. And they'll also have material to edit with. They'll be able to have trailers sooner. They'll be able to have a work in progress, edit before it takes 3 to 6 months for visual effects to do temps. So,
Right.
that whole ingesting of the plate and then selecting it's just all there. They have material to work with. I think it's very similar to how the migration from film cameras to digital cameras, right? You can now have 60 takes a day instead of 10 to 12, right? I mean, it's just,
Right.
whatever. There was a transition where you can now, the speed to which you can do things is accelerated. Your iteration cycle is accelerated. And, with these backgrounds, there is some things you can change, right? I mean, depending on if it's a full 3D set environment or whether it's a 2D environment, you can change some things, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
essentially this whole, it's like one pan and tile process. Your
Mm-hmm.
wall is basically your pan and tile, right? And you
Right.
can add layers in there. You can
Right.
have, a whole, a DMP that's broken out in layers, and you can get parallax with like a 2.5D approach versus a 3D
Mm-hmm.
approach. So it's really pretty versatile in terms of, what you're trying to do from a creative standpoint. You want to add some birds flying around. You want to add some car. So it's not like it's completely inflexible, right? Directors
Right.
can make day of changes if they decide to do that. It just, you have to plan ahead for what you can and can't do.
Right.
And it's just like as this virtual art department. The idea is to give the director some creative flexibility that you can do that.
Right.
So, and what you see is what you get. That's the other thing, right? You're designing the image for in camera. So, you may be on the stage looking at it going, man, that just doesn't look real, but through the camera it will, because that's your comp, right?
Right.
And that's your final image, and that's what you're designing things for. So it's interesting. It's a learning curve for everybody.
Now, the directors are going to have to learn what they can and can't change, right? And that's going to be something that they learn, but at least they're part of the creative decision making at the time,
That's
right?
Yeah, and look, I think you're going to get some directors that have some, oh man, I really was hoping to be able to do this, but what we're seeing is that most of the response is really positive. Wow, I can do this, and wow, I can do this, and this is exciting because I never, again, they're used to traditional green screen process or having to fix it in post, and so to be able to see things in camera and have something right away, it's gratifying.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So what do you now, because of this, obviously let's start talking about the impact of real time.
Mm-hmm.
Real time has to be sort of part of this world in some ways and be part of that process. How have you found, what are your thoughts on real time technology in general, or where things are going in terms of how that's going to impact visual effects?
Well, in and outside of virtual production, I think we as a community are impatient, right? The
Right.
whole putting your hat down, I'm waiting for my renders, while you're taking a nap. I mean, that's always been our issue, right? Is rendering
Mm-hmm.
and the time it takes. And now that rendering means your artists are having idle time, which means that, as a visual effects company, you're always trying to tighten your margins and keep
Hmm.
your artists as efficient as possible. So the more that they're not waiting for renders, the more effective they are as artists, the more iterations you can send to the client, the shorter your timelines come. It all means dollars, right? So the faster you render, the more margins you're going to have, which means the more efficient you're going to be, and ultimately your bottom line. And as we as an industry start migrating to more cloud-based computing, you're paying for those. I mean, you're always paying for computing, but at, as a variable cost, cloud computing costs money, right? And it's just a different. It's just something you have to factor differently when you have a 7-hour render versus a half-hour render. So
Hmm.
as we start doing real-time renders or getting closer to that as we do either GPU-based or whatever-based rendering, I think our industry benefits as a whole. It's just that photorealism real-time rendering has always been a challenge, right?
Hmm.
We've for years now, we get to a place where it looks like a great cinematic, but doesn't necessarily look photorealistic. And now we've broken through, right? We're now seeing photorealistic rendering through real-time rendering. It's just not everything be done that way. How complex is your scene? Do you have cloth simulation? Do you have hair dynamics? Do you have, atmospherics? All those things add complexity to scenes that either make it so you have to not be photorealistic or it's not real time.
Right.
So, but that's our thing, right? We all want Ready Player One, right? Like as a concept, right?
Hmm.
We all want to be able to have a world that just renders in real time photorealistically wherever we look, right? And so, hopefully we get there.
Yeah. Well, I think, you and I worked on movies like Ghost Rider and like iRobot, etc. And those are rasterized renders, right? And the thing
That's right.
is, you can make a rasterized renderer look photoreal. It just takes a lot more time to make it look real, right? And that, to me, what I've been, sort of saying is like the reason we moved to ray tracing wasn't necessarily that we couldn't get photorealism out of rasterized render, but just like the guy Rune Spawn who did the plane, you get there a lot faster and you don't need as much
Yeah,
work to get there. Right?
that's right.
So ray tracing is not necessarily that it looks better, it does look better, but it's that you don't have to work as hard to make it look better.
Yeah.
Right? So do you think that ray tracing, like if you solve the ray tracing problem and the real time problem, are you done at that point?
Yeah, because what you see, it's again from a producer aspect, you just want it to be done right away, right? You're
Right.
iterative, even honestly, even in virtual production, you need things to be real time because you have latency issues. But in the visual
Sure.
effects world, you want real time for your individual artists to get feedback immediately, and so you can put something into. You want to get something to compositing right away. I think in
Right.
our visual effects world, we're always gonna, no matter how photorealistic it gets out of 3D, we're always going to want to noodle it, right? We
Right.
always want to like adjust it and work with the client to do. It's just like, the best way I can describe it is even when you're on a real location shooting, right? We always
Hmm.
add lights, right? We always enhance the scene. We add a key light here to make it look beautiful, right?
Right.
If we shot things just as things naturally were, films wouldn't look as good,
Right.
right? So even if we do things completely realistic and photorealistic in our rendering, we're always going to want to make it look the way we want it to look, right? Directors will always want to have that control and creatives will. So the faster we can get that into compositing's hands and that finishing process, the better. So even if we got it into a minute, right, or whatever it takes, if 3D took as long as right it takes to do 2D rendering right now, that's even a huge accomplishment. And we're
Right.
probably not that far away, right? We're getting really close to that.
Right. Yeah, yeah, I think it's interesting. I think there's a lot of things to think about what real time can do, because the time between waiting from decision to decision, that's the thing that I think really kills people, and like as a
That's the thing that
business, right?
kills people. It's just
Right.
it's iterations. The sooner you
Right.
get iterations, the sooner you get feedback, because it's that feedback between an artist and their lead, the lead and the supervisor and their supervisor, the supervisor and the client, right? And so the quicker that whole feedback process happens, which is, a lot of what times why people are utilizing the cloud, right? If you're
Right.
not limited by the 1,000 processors that are on your local, you know, system, and you can tap into almost limitless processing, then you get feedback right away. And people are willing to pay for that
Right.
because timelines are getting compressed. People are making changes at the last minute. I mean, so as real time gets us there, I think the time to make movies will be compressed, right? I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of the reason why these major blockbuster films are so expensive is it takes so much time in post, right?
Yeah.
So as we reduce that time because our iterations, we can do more movies per year.
I also
We can,
think you make better decisions and better
yeah,
creative process, because I
yeah,
remember like when again, this was ages and ages ago, but on Ghost Rider, I was still using, it was the last show at Sony to use burps, which was their weird program for RenderMan, their RenderMan interface. But in burps, because they're using RenderMan to move a light, and you'd have to render a shadow map. So if you move the light, then you would basically have to go to the farm and render out the shadow maps of that light before you could see the proper
oh, I see.
results.
Sure.
And I was like, so I did move the light because I didn't want to have to deal with that process, which basically is not creative.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm not
3 days
so,
later.
yeah. It's like, why do I have to wait 20 minutes just to move a light? And it just doesn't make any sense. So I thought, like being able to get live feedback is great. And I think, what you're thinking about in terms of these LED walls and where virtual production is, that's what I'm excited about. That's what I'm excited.
Yeah.
It's like live feedback, and not just live feedback, but with the director there making that decision live, as opposed to I'll see it next week.
That's right. And in camera, right? Like that's your shot, right?
Yeah.
Like we're good. Like it's a wrap. And
yeah,
there's something really exciting about, I don't know, when you're on a stage and you've got that volume up and you're doing in-camera compositing, and
yeah,
you're able to say, actually, we're at dusk right now, but let's make it nighttime. Turn on the stars. You know what?
right.
Let's make it let's make it daytime, and you can see all that just change, and
Mm-hmm.
it's in camera with your talent, and your talent can react to that. It's exciting. I mean, you're basically going from, where you at. You're taking 6 months and compressing it into one moment, and
Right,
because it really sometimes it does. It takes 6 months, right, to
right,
go from um, being on stage, getting it, because a visual effects company normally won't work on a shot until it's been edited. So you got to wait 2 or 3 months before the director has been able to edit it. Then we have the exact frame length that we're supposed to work on, and then we camera track it, and then we build the pan and tile setup, or the digital map painting for it, or the 3D environment, and then we have a layout version and an animation version, and then finally we get a pre-comp, right?
right,
So 3 to 6 months later, you finally get to see something. And so
right.
that compression down into one day is really exciting, not just from a visual effects standpoint, but from a creative standpoint, I would imagine as a director or a producer, because
Right.
it's just so gratifying.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure. For sure. I think that's true. That's true. So, so I think, and the only way that's going to progress is if real time gets better and
that's
faster, right?
well, because what we're going to want to see is we're going to want to see trees moving, and then we're going to want to see atmospherics and explosions and
Right.
rain, and people are going to want more and more in these scenes, right? Like
Right.
right now, our scenes are pretty simple, right? They're simple landscapes or
Deserts.
cityscapes or whatever, deserts, and people are going
Lots
to
of
want to see
rocks.
more. Yeah,
Yep.
lots of rocks, right? And as we start making these scenes more complex, or rendering crowds and
Right.
people and creatures and everything else, it's, and look, hardware is going to keep being released that allows us to do more and more, right? This is
Right.
convergence of pipeline and software and hardware, right? That will get us to that point.
Yeah, for sure. All right. We talked a little bit. I mean, you mentioned, your startup in 2011 and the cloud, and but today obviously cloud has a bigger impact on the industry or some ways. And you and I have talked a little bit about that. Tell me what your thoughts are on where cloud computing stands today, and how you think it's going to affect the industry in some ways.
Well, I my experience with studios is we've used both Amazon and Google. I haven't used Azure yet, but it's going to be up to par with everybody else if it isn't already.
Mm-hmm.
And It saved my bacon on multiple occasions. I mean,
Okay.
I could say right now, had we not utilized cloud resourcing, we wouldn't have been able to deliver certain projects.
Right.
So we were able to render, you know, I think it was a month's worth of rendering within a 3D weekend. I couldn't have done that back in the day. A DD,
Right.
I think a building would have caught on fire.
Right.
So like it's just, or there just wouldn't have been resources to do it. Like you would have just not been able to deliver. You would have
Yeah.
just stacked up the farm and you would have waited weeks. And
Right.
so, you know, that's just on the rendering side. But from workstations to, I mean, look at even our physical storage, right? Optical drives have a shelf life. Solid state have reliability issues over time.
Right.
So, you know, cloud-based storage, cloud-based workstations, and rendering. To me, that's the future. I believe that since 2011, right? I mean, that's why I
Right.
did that whole thing. Is I just think that it's silly for us to have on-prem gear. As,
Sure.
as the latency of the artist's workstation to, or when I say the artist's work, from the artist's viewing and interaction to what you have on the cloud, as that becomes a non-issue, which in a lot of cases it is, and as we're able to stream 4K at 24, 48, whatever, at
Mhm.
multiple, higher frame rates through, that then, I mean, at some point we're going to get into speed of light issues and, there's all sorts of things, but I really do think that it's where we're going to be as an industry, even a security standpoint, right? Like all of your data is in the cloud. It's all on a tier one, you know, way more secure facility than anything you could have being in LA, right?
Right.
At a facility. So I think it just solves a lot of collaboration, right? Being able to tap into multiple artists around the globe, being able to have one place where all your data is constantly being backed up. So even from a secure, like from a backup and like disaster recovery type thing, it's all there. It's not on site. You could have an earthquake in LA and don't worry about it. Your internet's severed, but all the data's in the cloud.
Right.
So, I don't know. It's just, I can't imagine us not being fully cloud based at some point.
Yeah. I think it makes sense. It makes sense. What about, you mentioned the latency thing, right? But what about that for virtual production? I mean, do you think that there are going to be solutions that are going to work for virtual production and to be able to tap into a huge amount of compute? Because sometimes if you want to keep just adding more stuff and stuff and stuff, then you can just add more and more compute power to it, right?
Yeah.
But there's, there's edge computing, there's other things of that nature. Do you think that's going to start to come into play when it comes to virtual production as well, or?
Well, virtual production right now, you still have, I mean, you're putting multiple 4K outputs together on these large screens. Or,
Okay.
whatever, real-time rendering. You got to have
Right.
your virtual
Yep.
art department on the stage. There's a significant amount of hardware required to do that. And and right now, having a closed system due to security and everything based on the sound stage, there's going to be a requirement to have local hardware. But it's going to be different than, say, a VFX studio where you have hundreds of artists and everyone needs to have workstations and render nodes and storage. It's a much smaller footprint compared to an entire facility, right? You
Right.
may have a small server room, but a lot of your long-term storage and your main assets that you have could be still remote, and then you just push all the stuff you need for what you need on set for that day to local workstations, right? So, that's still a lot of experimental stuff that we're dealing with right now in terms of, what ends up being virtualized and what's not virtualized, what's on-prem and what's not. But yeah, I think cloud computing is something that will be utilized in virtual production. It's just there's a lot more, just on the LED side of things, there's a lot more gear required to get those streaming 4K in real time to the screens.
Sure.
But as technology progresses and hardware gets better, who knows where it will lead us.
Yeah. What are you the most looking forward to? Like, what do you think is going to really change things? Like, okay, once we have that, then I'm going to be set.
Well, I think once real-time rendering catches up to creatures and animation and effect simulation, and we can do things in camera. Once cameras can, I mean, we already have some of that right now, but once we'll know where our talent is, right, in camera, and we can layer things truly as a composite in real time. So the more we can do in camera, the better. And so I'm excited for what can be done in virtual production on set. And then also, just, and as we start doing this, our feature animation becomes more photorealistic. I mean, that's what's been so awesome about Love, Death, and Robots, right? Is that
Yeah.
you start seeing some really impressive work come out of animation, right? Full CG. And so I just think that that convergence of like, where are we getting this whole Ready Player One type way of storytelling, right? That's what's exciting to me, is just pushing the bounds of what we can do technically.
Yeah. I think that's going to be exciting. I think you're right that, when we're solving the real-time problem, rendering is only part of it, right? Like hair simulation and cloth sim, right? Cloth sim in real time doesn't look as good as when it's simmed offline.
Right.
Right.
That's right. And
fluid
how
sims
many iterations
and fluid sims, explosions, you can't do those in real time the same way, right?
Yeah.
So
you can have libraries, right? And you can have cached animation that allows you to, see what that looks like and maybe have versions of that. But yeah, that's where it gets complex.
Right. Yep. Yeah. Rendering's only half the problem.
But, I think having stock, libraries of simulation, right? I mean, at some point it's an iterative process and you have things that are very custom, right?
Sure.
Like throw a rock and it hits the water, there's only certain things. But, I think right now we have a lot of stock imagery for, photography-based stuff. And we have stuff for models, but I think, simulations will start having stock libraries and, things where, crowds, stock imagery for crowds and things like that. I mean, already there's probably things like that out there already, but I think you'll start seeing more of it.
Yeah. Interesting. So yeah, actually just asset libraries is going to be a big deal.
That's right. General asset libraries, environments, people, whatever. It's just, and effects, libraries of 3D effects and simulations, I think will be something that will be valuable to us, especially as we're doing more real-time stuff.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah, that makes sense. What about AI? What do you think about AI right now? How that's going to impact us? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think we're seeing that with humans a lot, right? Digital humans, AI and machine learning for, predictive facial movement and what faces are going to look like. And, this whole deep fake type thing. I mean, that's I think a huge part of AI. Also, when it comes to auto rig removal and paint outs and things that, used to, that are currently manual labor, that might, AI might be able to solve those issues. Camera tracking, right? AI camera tracking. That's already been in place. It just is just going to get better. Right. I still think that at some point, creative is going to be creative, right? AI can never truly replace creative. It will never be able to tell stories and be able to composite a shot the way your eye really wants it to be, because those are choices, right? And AI can predict, but to tell a story, I think it will be challenging for AI to do. I don't know. Who knows? Asimov predicted that it would happen sooner than so.
I think the way that I always look at it is that AI, or especially any kind of machine learning process, is based on something that's already been done before. So it'll only do something based on what's already been done, and a lot of the creative ideas come out of things that have never been done. So I can't get there unless it's already been done before. So that's what my feeling is about it.
Yeah, so. and look, even if AI might come up with something that looks really good, we may want to change it to look worse, right? I mean, that's a creative choice. I mean, directors are directors, and they may decide to do whatever they want to do. But I just at some point, I think AI will aid in our ability to iterate faster.
Yeah. Again, so it all comes down to iterations again, right? That's what it's coming out to. Yeah.
Always.
Yeah.
And maybe that's just me because I'm just think too much as a producer, but I'm always like, how can I get stuff done faster? How can I increase that feedback time? How do I keep people more efficient? And it's really always comes down to iterations.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if I really look back at, back in the day when I was doing lighting, it was, oh my God, it was the most inefficient thing possible, because what it was is like, I show up on the day, right? And I'd have to wait for compositing to comp my shots to see what it was going to look like. And then, so most of the time I'm just kind of noodling around on my computer, guessing what's going to happen. Right. And then finally I get the feedback from the compositor of what my lighting from the day before looked like. And then I have to do all night. I got to prepare to just like get all my lighting stuff on the farm and then get it on the farm so it could render overnight. And then it would come back. So it's basically just one version a day per shot.
Right. And it's guesswork too, right? Like you're looking at what happened in the comp, assuming that if you change these sliders around, it might improve what you see back in comp the next time you render.
Right.
But who knows? Let's see.
Yeah.
I mean, how many times did a lighter throw something on a farm because it was a guess?
Every time.
Most of the time. Yeah.
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 Yep. Yeah. Yep. And when you see 45 versions of a shot, that's like 45 days that thing has been on the farm.
Or more. Yeah. And we've been, and we've all been there in the shots that take hundreds of versions, and like we've been rendering this shot for a year. I mean, we all have been there, and so I'm excited for the technology advances. I think, and like, we've talked about this before too, things like Omniverse, right? Collaborative working in scenes where multiple artists can see what each other are doing in real time is exciting too.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's true. And you mentioned this, we've been chatting about this for a little bit, but not on the podcast, but just the idea of, people working not just next to each other, but inside the scene together, right? That's going to be an exciting part of it. So like, oh, you're doing that part and I can look over in my scene to see what you're doing. And so we can all see how this is all happening in real time. So pretty exciting for sure.
Well, a lot of our day-to-day work in visual effects is mentoring, right? You have senior artists that are mentoring junior artists and leads that are mentoring seniors and supervisors and to be able to be in a collaborative platform where you can show someone by moving a light, we do this. Or, I mean, how many times do notes just get miscommunicated or verbals just get miscommunicated? And our industry, right? We have artists that come from all over the globe working in one place. I remember there was this time, this is a real communication issue that happened at Sony. We had an artist that we had grass and glass that had to be communicated, right? And this artist is mixing up grass was glass and glass was grass. And so it just even tasks were getting miscommunicated just based off of the language barrier issue. Right. And so when you're in a scene together and you'd be like, here, do this. It's like, you don't need to explain that to me verbally. We could be having two different languages. You could have artists that speak completely different languages working in a scene together and be communicating. That's cool,
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, this is very exciting. I love the vision of your future. It's going to be an exciting place to get to. And we've gone over time, but that's perfectly fine. Steve, I really appreciate you, communicating with us and getting connect with you again. It's been, we've known each other like close to 20 years, like you said. So it's been kind of fun to reconnect because it's been too long, honestly. It's been too long.
Long time.
It's been a long time. So maybe at some point soon we can get together in person now that we're actually in town. All right. Thanks, Steve.
I appreciate it, Chris. Yeah, thanks so much.